This is the Power Break Podcast number 031, titled A Trip Down the Colorado River Through the Grand Canyon. Hi, everyone. This is your host, Bob Brubaker, inviting you to stay tuned as we seek to give you a little power in this break to help you succeed in the race of life. The Power Break Podcast interview programs are designed to feature stories of perseverance to help you keep pressing on in life. And today we have as our guest, Steve Pohlman, a good friend of mine with whom I cycle regularly, who has joined us on our ride across Florida. But today he's talking about a trip he took down the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon. If you'd like information about the Grand Canyon and trips like this, we have a link in today's show notes, which can be found on my website, bobbrubaker.com. Just look for the podcast links in today's show, which is number 031. Well, let's get on with the interview as Steve joined me at a local Panera Bread to talk about his exciting trip. Here with my friend Steve Pohlman today, we're talking about persevering in a fun activity. There have been many people who have talked about paddling down the Colorado River and the Grand Canyon. And was that on your bucket list, Steve?
No, I was fortunate enough that my daughter won the permit for a non-commercial rafting trip down the Grand Canyon, and she asked me if I would go, and of course I said yes.
Well, but I saw that there was one of the guys that was climbing Mount Everest recently. He stopped. He said on his bucket list, the next thing was to raft down the Colorado River and the Grand Canyon. So there you go.
There you go.
That's something that you've done. Now,
yeah, well,
let's talk a little bit about how that came about. You said your daughter got the permit.
Yeah, so you have to apply through the National Park Service for a permit to raft the Grand Canyon, and there's many more applications than there are permits available, and she was fortunate enough on her first time to get the permit in the month of June so that her brother, who's still in high school, could come along with us as well.
Okay, so how many people all total were on the trip?
16.
16. Now, where did she collect all these 16 people?
So half of the people were close friends and family, her roommate from college and her boyfriend who turned out to be fiance on the trip. We had 2 engagements on the trip.
Okay.
And then a friend from college also. And then the other half of the group was from the raft guide that she bought her first kayak from, Ian, and was his friends, who was a collection of raft guides, kayakers, and one dad. To go along with me. So, and then there were 2 people that were last-minute additions because some folks had to back out, and they came off the internet and ended up being good friends.
Well, that's good. Now you said, I know you've done quite a number of endurance events, from cycling to swimming and triathlons. And, how did this compare to any of those events?
So this is much more fun. And while there's an endurance component about it, it's more of a camping / expedition than it is really an endurance event, because we're out for 19 days. And so the rowing activity of it is kind of the endurance part, unless, of course, you want to do side canyon trips. So one of the additional people that joined us was a canyoneer, so he had extensive experience in canyoneering. So he led side expeditions up into canyons and rappelled the group in and came down the canyon. I chose to sit those out because it was 100-plus degrees out, and they were all 20-something. And, I rested in the shade in the side canyons.
Well, okay, let's back up. So she got the permit.
Yeah.
When did she get the permit?
The lottery is in February, and it's for the following year.
Okay.
So she got it in February of 2018. So we knew in March or April that we were going to go on the trip in June of 2019.
Okay.
So
you had time to plan things out.
Yeah. But the bulk of it we hired through an outfitter, Moenkopi River Works, out in Flagstaff, Arizona.
Okay, explain how that works now.
So
an outfitter is going to help you get to where you're going? Or?
No. So if you have all your gear, if you have rafts and you have all the outdoor gear, you can do it yourself and bring your own rafts and bring your own coolers and bring your own food and pack out like that. Or you can rent any subcomponent of that. Okay. We chose to go to Moenkopi, and they provided the rafts. They provided the safety gear. They provided the groovers, which are the bathrooms. They provided all the kitchen utensils, kitchen tables, cooktops, propane. We paid for the food. They provided a menu, and then they provided a food. So 2 months before the trip, they give you a menu, and then they start to freeze everything in big 6-foot-long coolers. So you have fresh meat and fresh produce, or frozen, the meat all is frozen, but you also pack in fresh produce. So they put together everything for the trip. There was a group we met on the river that was from St. Louis, and they chose to pack their own food, but they rented rafts. So you can do some part of it, but for us, we don't have the proper stuff, so it was easier to rent it or outfit it with them. They also have a river house that we stayed at the night before, which gave us a chance to meet our new friends.
Okay. And where was that?
In Flagstaff, Arizona. So it's from about 2.5 hours from Flagstaff to Lee's Ferry, where you put in for the trip down to Colorado. So Lee's Ferry is under the Glen Canyon. It's about 15 miles down from the Glen Canyon Dam.
Okay.
And then you raft from there to the top of Lake Mead, which is 280 miles downriver through the Grand Canyon.
Whoa.
Yeah, that's a lot of fun.
So you went to Flagstaff and you met up with everybody.
Yep.
And then did they take you then?
So then the next morning they picked us up in they had a stake bed truck with all of the equipment, the rafts, the coolers, all the equipment they were providing us, and a big van, and drove us to Lee's Ferry, where we put in. And we set up the rafts, we rigged them, we put all the coolers in, ammo boxes, tables, everything, and floated about 50 yards downstream where we camped for the night. And the next
50 yards downstream.
50 yards downstream. The water's fun. To get to the campsite there, because you put in on a big like boat put in.
Okay.
And then you move downstream and camp down there, and the next morning you meet with the rangers. In this case, it was Peggy, who's been there. Well, she's an icon. She's been there for years, and they give you a safety briefing for about an hour before you push off and head down the river.
Is that required for everybody?
It's required for everybody, yeah. Because there's so much volume going down the Grand Canyon, they want you to be sure that you leave no trace and are very conscious of what you're doing so you don't pollute the campsites, don't trample on historic and prehistoric artifacts that are in the caves and side canyons, and are respectful of the environment. It's a very sensitive environment because it's desert.
Right. Well, that's interesting. So the first night you camped 50 yards.
First night you camp 50 yards, and the next morning you do your briefing with the rangers, and then you push off. And it's you and your rafts and your supplies for the next 19 days.
So how many rafts did you have in your...
We had 6 rafts.
6 rafts?
6 rafts.
You had a kayak?
We had 5 or 6 kayaks. My son kayaked the whole way, and then another gentleman stand-up paddleboarded the whole way.
That's amazing.
And then we had 2 more stand-up paddleboards uninflated, and we had a ducky uninflated with us that we put in to play with.
A ducky?
A ducky. So a ducky is a inflatable canoe would be the easiest way to to describe it. Yeah.
I thought like the duck. Rubber duck.
We had an inflatable unicorn and llama along with us that went through the rapids with my daughter, and got used as an inflatable pool toy down the fun parts to float in and to play in.
Okay.
So a lot of the Grand Canyon's wide, flat water, and then it's interspersed with rapids.
Okay.
And so there's a lot of area where you can float. Just let your raft float down with the current, which is going 4 to 5 miles an hour. Or you can float in an inner tube, or you can float on a pool toy, albeit the water is 60 degrees.
Ooh.
So it's brisk. Yeah. It's nice.
Okay, so your first day was kind of uneventful, the fact that you had to sit through the lectures by the rangers.
It's uneventful till about 10 o'clock, 10:30, 11 o'clock when you push off.
Okay.
Because now the adventure begins, right?
Now the adventure begins.
Yeah, and there's some rapids up there in the early going.
Okay.
And our group had 2 folks who had rowed oar rig rafts. And these rafts are 18-foot rafts. They weigh 1,800 pounds, fully loaded, maybe a little more.
Wow.
And they're oar rig, not paddle. So in the southeast, you're used to paddle in rafts. These have the oars set up on metal frames. So we were rowing those, and only 2 of our folks had experience doing that, and one of those was on a stand-up paddleboard.
Oh.
So everybody was kind of, okay.
We're new at this.
We're new at this. And this was my question for my daughter the whole way. Who's going to row these rafts? I mean, I'm glad to work, you know that.
Yeah.
But I have no skill. Well, she said, Dad, that's your raft. So
She's the leader.
She's the leader, yeah, because
Okay.
she had the permit. She was the trip leader.
Okay.
And so I guess I had to learn on the job, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How was that?
It was wonderful.
Yeah.
So it's fun to learn, right?
Yeah.
It's good to learn new skills. I was fortunate enough not to flip the raft, but one of the other groups who was learning flipped the raft on the first day. They got sideways in a rapid, and poof, over it went.
How
Yeah.
long are the rapids? Like the first day when you get there?
It depends. They tend to be relatively short in the Grand Canyon. They tend to be a pool above the rapids, and it's an area where the walls have narrowed down or rocks have been deposited, and then a pool behind them. So they're length, a couple hundred yards long, give or take, depending
Wow.
on some are longer than others.
Okay.
And so they're not overly dangerous. I mean, if you fall out of your boat and all, you're going to end up in the pool at the bottom. And when I say pool, this is a wide river. It's a big
Yeah.
river. But the problem is the coldness of the water, and it's never fun to have a raft land on top of you, right?
So what happens if you distributed all the things that you're taking, the food?
So everything's lashed down. Everything's tied in with cam straps. So everything's
So if it
secure.
flips, it's
If
not
it flips, assuming and everybody did their job right, and nobody loosened anything up, or everything stays with the boat. We just have takes all of us pulling on 4 ropes to flip it back over.
Mercy.
To get it righted. Yeah.
Wow.
So
Okay, that was the first day.
that was the
Got to
first day.
rapids.
Yeah.
So then
So we got to a campsite. So you have a map going down the river. It's a waterproof map. It's 30, 40 pages long. That shows about each 5-mile increment of the river, and it shows the campsites in the rapids. So you know where you're going, and we had an itinerary where we wanted to stay. So we camped. And again, you have everything on your raft, so you set up camp, cook dinner, and we ate very well because you bring great food. I mean, we had everything from fajitas, tacos, steaks, salmon steaks, lasagna. We cooked in Dutch ovens. We had cakes. You're able to carry a lot of stuff on these rafts, so you're not suffering.
I was going to say, you didn't lose weight on this.
No, you don't lose weight on this. And as one of the 20-something raft guides said, hey, he doesn't eat this well at home. So you camp, and then the next morning you get up and do it again, right? You do breakfast, you pack up camp, and you head down the river. Now there's wonderful side adventures as you go down the river. There's side canyons to explore.
Okay.
There's a little Colorado River, which is a beautiful blue color that flows into it. So each day you may have side trips you're going to take. So you may have a long day or a short day, depending on where you are on the river and what the activities are. Also, certain days have more rapids than others. So you kind of lay in your itinerary based on where you are and what the adventures are.
Okay.
So early on, I think our third day, we took a layover day because we were at Silver Grotto, which was a beautiful canyon that the group went and hiked up on top of it and then rappelled into it and then rappelled down the dry waterfalls back out to the river. So we spent a day there. And then camped at the same spot and moved on the next day. So we did that 3 times where we didn't leave the camp because there was activities to do.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Did you have a specific date that you had to be at the end?
We had to be off the river on 6/22, I think.
Okay.
So we had a day we had to do it. How we chose to move from point A to point B was all up to us.
Okay.
In our itinerary. So we had some days where we did 20 miles, 25 miles of rafting. We had other days where we did no rafting and stayed at a site and explored the side canyons or played in the river or a combination of both. Yeah.
Now, you had all these people.
Uh-huh.
Sometimes when people are together, there's a little tension between you. Did you have any the tension build up?
Not much. Relatively speaking, compared to other groups. There's a little bit, but no, everybody was really helpful. And I think it's because you're so isolated, right? It's the 16 of you. A lot of us were new to the river, so there was a lot of, I would say, anxiety, maybe a little strong, but learning how to get down the river in the rafts was a lot for people. Well, we had experienced kayakers and East Coast raft guides. I mean, experienced watermen moving these big boats down the river, and was a little bit of an experience. So I think that helped the group gel, and everybody was having a good time. So everybody got along well and played. Also had a fair amount of beer and wine and booze along, which probably helped the group along down the river as well.
What was the most challenging thing for you?
For me, it was learning to drive the raft down the river. Not so much through the rapids, but more learning to read the river. So the river's a big, strong river. It has a lot of eddies. Eddies are currents that are moving back upstream, and they'll grab that raft and send you back upstream very quickly. So it's learning how to read the river and the current of the river to stay in the current and let it do the work for you and stay out of the eddies. The example would be in a big sweeping corner. You're not driving a car, so you don't take the shortest distance between 2 points and cut across the strait. You need to follow the flow out around the river and stay in the current. And that was probably the biggest challenge, and one I enjoyed. And then the physical challenge of rowing.
Did you ever get tired?
Yeah. On those 25-mile days? Sure. It's a heavy raft to row. Yeah. There's a lot of flat water, and to get that done, you have to put the oars in the water. You can't just float. And it's hot. It's 100-plus degrees, and when that wind blows up the canyon, which it does, it's like putting a hairdryer on you. It's not like Florida, where you know how much I sweat.
Yeah.
I was bone dry. In the canyon because it's such a dry heat. Now, the answer to that is you jump in the river, cool off. Once in a while, get wet.
Just slow down here so I can jump in the river?
Literally. Yeah. And I'd wear long pants and shirt to get the sun off me, soak it up, and then let it just dry off as you evaporate and cool as you go down the river.
Wow.
So, it was tiring.
What was the most beautiful thing you saw?
Oh, every day the canyon. It's spectacular.
Is it really?
It shows you how infinitesimally small you are. Because the air is so dry and so clear, you can see the walls in great detail. It's much clearer there and sharper. And the canyon, while it changes, you have steep walls and you have walls that are a little farther back. It's beautiful in the different sun. And the night sky. There's no lights out there. You can see the night sky. You can see the Milky Way. You can see the constellations in all its beauty, like it must have been, years ago when there weren't lights. So those two things are just spectacular.
So that was probably emphasized, especially when you were camping.
You just look up through the top of our tent. We didn't put our rain fly on because the weather was fine, and you could just watch the stars at night.
Oh, wow.
We did have we had a full moon, so there'd be times when you couldn't see it, but then the moon would eliminate the canyon walls, and you could see those out of the top of your tent. And I'm an avid reader. It wasn't until the 16th day that I broke open a book.
I was wondering about that.
That's how beautiful it was. You just sit there and look at the nature and look at the things.
Wow.
So we'd see longhorn sheep along the side of the river, which were cool. We had scorpions in our camp under our bags and stuff. So you're out in the desert. Mm-hmm. We walked by a rattlesnake and didn't recognize it until we were past it. Then we had to go back by it on the trail. That was a little interesting because he was curled up in a little bush. Rattled at us as we went by, and it was like, oh, wow. We had to turn around from the river we were at and go back past it. So, there's a lot of nature out there to be seen. And beautiful trout fishing. If any of your listeners are trout fishermen, unbelievable amount of trout in the river.
Were you allowed to fish?
Yeah, you're allowed to fish. And we had some avid fishermen, and we'd just pull out trout like crazy.
Oh, my.
So there's a lot of nature. The river's surprisingly green when you get in the side canyons. I mean, you're in a desert environment, and you think of it being very scrubby, but there's a lot of water and trees and green, much more than I would have thought. I mean, I was
along the side
of the river. Yeah, I would have thought it would be much more barren, but there's life.
Isn't there a fear that there would be a sudden surge of the water coming down the river?
So it's dam controlled.
So
the river has tides. So the release from the the Glen Canyon Dam is known and published. So you know how much water you have. It goes between 10,000 and 13,000 CF, that's cubic feet per second this time of the year during the weekdays, and I think it's 9,000 on the weekends. So depending how far you are from the dam, you're getting a tide, and yes, you can leave your raft stranded on the beach if you don't tie them up correctly, much like a boat here, in Florida. No, so the big concern is flash floods from rain in the side canyons.
Okay.
So we were in the dry time of the year, but during the monsoon season, which is July, there's that fear, particularly from the side canyons, that you get a heavy rain and then a huge amount of water moving off the drainage area from the rain.
So hats off to your daughter who planned this in June.
Planning it in June. Exactly. And we had it threatened to rain one day. But it was beautiful.
Wow.
Yeah.
So looking back on it, what was most rewarding about it for you?
So for me, I think it was watching my son and daughter. Obviously, my son's 17, and he's a avid kayaker, and he kayaked the whole river. Never got out of his boat to raft till the last 40 miles when we just floated. And then my daughter learned some leadership challenges as she had to deal with some folks that maybe didn't pull their weight as much as they should have at times. So that was fun. But I think the beauty of the river. Personally, for me to learn how to row that raft and, row it the length of the canyon was fun and really became, your second home after a while when you spend 19 days doing something continuously.
Wow.
You enjoy it. It's fun. So I look forward to doing it again.
Do you have a trip planned?
Not yet. I can't do one. So the other part of it is you can only do one trip down the Grand Canyon per year. It's limited by the Park Service.
Okay.
So I can't do one until next year. And last night, in fact, there was a whole bunch of cancellations for 2019 where you could rebid for positions. But I couldn't apply because I can't go on the river until 2020. So as soon as I can apply for 2020, I will be.
But then you have to get in the lottery, and it'll be another year before you get it.
So the February lottery will be for 2021, but they're cancellations. So they'll do intermediate lotteries depending on how people cancel. If people cancel their trips that may have won before, and this was the case that they had for the balance of 2019. They had some cancellations, so you could apply for permits for those time periods.
Talk about perseverance. Steve wants to go back. So it was a fun persevering down the river. How did it feel when you got close to the end? You knew that you were getting close to the end.
Yeah, so we knew we were getting close to the end. The last night we lashed all 6 rafts together and floated the last 40 miles down the river. You're starting to come into the upper reaches of Lake Mead. The river widens out. It's not as fast flowing. There's not rapids, and we floated through the night.
Cool.
All 6
on the raft.
Slept on the rafts and floated down the river, and occasionally you bounce off the side of the wall of the canyon, but it's spectacular. So that was a lot of fun. I think that the biggest thing, getting to the end, was, but by the end you're ready to get to the end because the trip's over. So it's kind of like, it's time to move on. But I think on the drive back to Flagstaff, we stopped in Kingman, Arizona at an In-N-Out Burger to get lunch, and we're all scruffy, dusty, We've been on the river.
On the river in the canyon.
Yeah, we've loaded up the truck. The river is very sandy, so you get a lot of grit and sand on everything. And we go into this packed In-N-Out Burger with all these people and noise and commotion, and it's a real shock to come back to civilization. You want to return to the canyon and the peace and the quiet, and you're 16 people. You kind of become a tribe.
Yeah.
So as you float down the canyon, there's other trips going by you, both commercial trips, some of them in motorized boats that go by faster, and some paddling that you see repeatedly as you leapfrog over each other down the river with your activities. So you kind of take on a tribal mentality, that it's your group and the other groups, and you're, of course, better, right, than the other group. So you can see how when you're out in the wilderness, for your life, you become very associated with the tribe.
Sure.
Given all its goods, bads, and others, but that's the people you depend on to, survive. Not that we were in, trying to figure out where we're going to get our food from, but to work as a team and to work together. You got to rely on each other. So you can clearly see how tribal allegiance and loyalties develop very quickly if you lived in a very difficult environment.
So do you have a reunion plan for next year?
Not yet, but I'm sure once I get that next permit, I won't have any problem getting a team of 16 to go down the river. As my daughter said in one of her summaries, is, quit the job, sell the farm, go down the Grand Canyon. It's that much fun.
Well, it must be like an addiction to it, and you want to go back.
Yeah, you want to go back because it is so nice to get away from all the electronics. I mean, we had a satellite phone for emergencies, and we check in periodically to let everybody know you're all right. But you lose all the electronics, you lose all the emails, you lose all the phone calls, you lose all the
noise.
The noise. Yeah. Wow. I mean, you have music, but the lights are gone. Yeah. It's as close as you're going to get.
Well, folks, you can't see him, but Steve has a real riverman look. He let his beard grow, and the question is, are you going to continue to grow that until you go back on the river? Or?
Right now, my wife likes it, so it's staying.
There you go.
My hair was longer than it's been since the 70s, so...
Well, Steve, we appreciate you being on the program today and hearing about this persevering and a good time, but it wasn't just a total pleasure trip that you just sat back and, as you said, you learned and you rode. And
you had to work, but that's what makes it fun, right? It's not
part of the team.
It's just sitting back and gliding through life isn't much fun.
Yeah, so it was work, but it was fun, and what beautiful scenery. So thanks for joining us today on the Power Break podcast.
You're welcome, Bob. Thank you.
This has been an interview with Steve Pohlman telling about his trip down the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon. For information about trips like this, you can follow the links on the National Park Service, which will have that URL address in today's show notes, which can be found at bobbrubaker.com. Today's show is number 031. The show notes, the books, the weekly Power Break blog, and more can be found at bobbrubaker.com. So check it out and listen next time for the Power Break podcast.